feeling his body heavy with fever. All James wanted was silence, but his baby's sharp cry echoed in his head. Suddenly, a soft voice cuts through the crying, singing a melody that hits him like lightning. Peering through the door, the new maid, with her face bathed in silent tears, calms his son, and he realizes that the world he knew was about to crumble. Sarah Miller's fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code filling the screen with elegant precision. The office around her had emptied hours ago, but the glow of her monitor illuminated her determined face as she worked to fix a critical bug before tomorrow's client presentation. That's impressive work. The voice startled her. Sarah looked up to see James Blackwood leaning against her cubicle, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual startup environment. His presence after hours wasn't unusual. As the representative overseeing the potential acquisition, he often stayed late, observing the company's operations. "Just doing my job," she replied, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Most people would have given up 2 hours ago." His blue eyes studied her with unmistakable interest. "Coffee break? You look like you could use one." 20 minutes later, they sat in the building's small cafe, the only 2 people there at 9:30 in the evening. "So, a computer science degree from Northwestern and you're working at a startup instead of Google?" James asked, stirring his espresso. Sarah smiled. "I like building things from the ground up. Big tech feels like joining someone else's story halfway through." "I understand that sentiment more than you might think." Something in his tone suggested genuine connection, though in my case the story was written before I was born. She knew who he was. Everyone did. James Blackwood, 30 years old, heir to Blackwood Industries, the medical technology conglomerate worth billions. Temporarily in Chicago to oversee potential acquisitions for his family's company before taking over as vice president in a few months. Their late-night coffee became dinner the following evening. Dinner became weekend excursions to galleries and hidden jazz clubs. Each encounter revealed their undeniable chemistry, despite the glaring differences in their backgrounds. "This view never gets old," James said one evening, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, Chicago's skyline glittering before them. Sarah wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You sound like you're already saying goodbye." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This is just a chapter, Sarah, a temporary assignment before I return to Manhattan." "I know," she whispered, pushing away the twinge of pain his words caused. "You've made that clear from the beginning." 6 months into their relationship, Sarah stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, the 2 pink lines undeniable. Morning sickness she'd attributed to project stress suddenly made perfect sense. That evening, she prepared a special dinner in James's apartment, her mind racing through possibilities. They'd been careful, but nothing was foolproof. Would he be shocked? Angry? Perhaps unexpectedly? Pleased? By 11 o'clock, the untouched dinner had grown cold. When James finally arrived, his tie loosened and smelling faintly of expensive whiskey, Sarah knew the moment had arrived. "James, we need to talk." She took a deep breath and placed the pregnancy test on the coffee table between them. The silence that followed was suffocating. James stared at the plastic stick as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "Are you sure it's mine?" The coldness in his voice cut through her like a physical blow. "How can you even ask that?" Sarah's voice trembled. "You know I've only been with you these past months." James ran his hand through his perfectly groomed hair and walked to the panoramic window, the nighttime skyline reflecting in his glacial blue eyes. "Sarah, you need to understand my position. I'm weeks away from becoming vice president at Blackwood. My father expects me to marry someone from our social circle. A pregnancy now. With you." He let the sentence die, but its meaning was crystal clear. "With someone like me?" Sarah repeated, disbelief washing over her. "Be realistic. You're brilliant with code, but completely unprepared for the world I live in. My family has dinner with senators and global CEOs. You can't even pronounce the names of the wines we serve. James spoke as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You would be miserable in that world, and frankly, I would be constantly reminded of my lapse in judgment." Sarah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought what we had was real. It was real within its context, a temporary relationship during my Chicago assignment." His voice was clinically detached. "But this changes everything." Sarah spent the night crying in the guest bedroom while James made calls behind closed doors. When morning came, he placed an envelope on the breakfast table as Sarah, red-eyed, attempted to eat some toast. $100,000, enough to solve the problem or start a new life away from here, but I need you to leave today. My assistant will come help you with your things." "How can you be so cruel?" Sarah whispered, staring at the envelope. "This isn't a fairy tale, Sarah. I'm offering you a dignified exit. Many women would be grateful for this opportunity." His tone was that of an executive closing a failed negotiation. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in a tiny apartment in Chicago's suburbs, affordable on her meager savings. Fired from the startup, which had mysteriously been acquired by Blackwood Industries overnight, she had no references to secure another tech job. Within weeks, she was working 2 minimum-wage positions, barista by day, data entry clerk by night, just to survive. In her 5th month of pregnancy, Sarah was fired from the coffee shop when her uniform could no longer disguise her growing belly. Sitting in a public clinic waiting room, hearing she needed bed rest to prevent premature labor, Sarah stared at her swollen ankles and thought of James's untouched envelope, still sealed in her drawer. "I won't use his money," she whispered to her growing belly, "but I will use what I know." That night, Sarah called her former mentor from college, Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, a respected computer science professor. Between tears, she revealed everything. "Come to Boston," Eleanor offered. "Stay with me until the baby is born. I have contacts at MIT who could use someone with your talent in artificial intelligence, even for remote work." 2 weeks later, Sarah left Chicago carrying only 2 suitcases, one with clothes and another with programming books and her laptop. In James's now opened envelope, she left only a note: "We don't need your money. One day you'll see what you threw away." In Eleanor's small Cambridge apartment, Sarah gave birth to Noah Miller on a freezing January dawn. Holding the dark-haired baby with intense blue eyes, so similar to his father's, Sarah made a promise. "I'll build something so extraordinary that one day when he sees us, he'll understand exactly what he discarded." During her maternity leave, between night feedings and diaper changes, Sarah began developing a machine learning algorithm to predict medical diagnoses based on symptoms and patient history, using knowledge she had gained while working close to James's medical technology acquisitions. When Noah turned 6 months old, Eleanor introduced Sarah to a group of angel investors in Boston. With the baby sleeping in a carrier against her chest, Sarah presented her imperfect but promising prototype. "My son taught me I can't control the future, but I can predict possibilities based on past data. That's exactly what my algorithm does with medical diagnoses." One investor, impressed by both her resilience and her code, offered $150,000 as seed capital. In exchange for a small apartment above his garage in Brookline, Sarah would also become a technology consultant for his other projects. When she signed the papers, Sarah legally changed her surname to Reynolds, honoring the woman who sheltered her when she needed it most. "Sarah Miller died in Chicago," she told Eleanor. "Sarah and Noah Reynolds have a future to build." As she signed Sarah Reynolds for the first time, she had no idea she was beginning a journey that would culminate 15 years later in a public confrontation that would bring James Blackwood to his knees before the woman and son he had rejected. Sarah changed her last name to Reynolds, honoring the woman who had become her salvation. As she signed the legal documents, the pen felt weighty in her hand, heavier than just plastic and ink. Each stroke marked the death of Sarah Miller, the naive programmer who had trusted a Blackwood, and the birth of Sarah Reynolds, a woman determined to succeed against all odds. Sarah Miller died in Chicago, she told Eleanor as they left the courthouse. Sarah and Noah Reynolds have a future to build. The future, however, proved harder to build than to name. 1 month after arriving in Boston, Sarah's limited savings were dwindling rapidly. The borrowed stability of Eleanor's apartment was a blessing, but Sarah needed work that would accommodate her growing pregnancy and eventually a newborn. Her first interview at a software development firm started promisingly. The technical assessment had gone flawlessly, with the interviewer raising his eyebrows in appreciation at her efficient solutions. Then came the in-person meeting. "Your qualifications are impressive, Ms. Reynolds," the interviewer said, his eyes dropping to her 5-month pregnant belly, barely concealed by her only professional-looking blouse. His demeanor shifted instantly. "However, I just remembered the position was actually filled yesterday. Administrative oversight that you were called in. My apologies." Sarah recognized the lie immediately. "I understand," she replied quietly, gathering her portfolio. "Congratulations to your new hire." Outside, snow was beginning to fall. Sarah pulled her inadequate coat tighter around her body, one hand instinctively protective over her belly. The rejection stung, but she couldn't afford tears. Not yet. There were 3 more interviews scheduled that week. By Friday, all 4 companies had mysteriously filled their positions just before or during her interviews. One HR representative had been kinder than the others, pulling Sarah aside after. "Look, I'm not supposed to say this," the woman whispered, "but startups want all-hands-on-deck employees. They see pregnancy and think divided attention and maternity leave. It's not right, but it's reality." The following Monday, Sarah began her first day as a barista at a local coffee shop. The manager had been hesitant but desperate for help. "Just keep that apron tied tight," he'd instructed, "and we'll see how it goes." Morning sickness hadn't received the memo that it should end after the first trimester. Sarah spent her breaks in the bathroom, retching quietly before splashing cold water on her face and returning to the counter with a forced smile. The smell of coffee, once pleasant, now triggered waves of nausea that she fought through hour after hour. "Medium latte for Tim," she called out, placing the cup on the counter. The businessman grabbed it without looking up from his phone. "This is cold," he snapped, finally taking a sip. "Make it again." By the end of her 8-hour shift, Sarah's ankles had swollen so badly that her shoes cut into her flesh. Standing on concrete floors while pregnant was its own special form of torture, one that continued night after night when she reported to her second job. The data entry position was at an insurance company, working the night shift in an empty office. From 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., Sarah sat in a gray cubicle, transferring information from paper forms into digital databases. The work was mind-numbing, but the silence was merciful, and occasionally she could slip in a few minutes of coding on her personal project between batches of forms. "You're the only one who never complains," her supervisor commented one night, dropping another stack of papers on her desk. "Everyone else whines about how boring this is." Sarah managed a tired smile. "I'm grateful for the work." What she didn't say was that boredom was a luxury she couldn't afford. Each keystroke was a penny toward rent, toward diapers, toward a future where she wouldn't have to choose between fresh fruit for her baby and a programming textbook for herself. Those choices became increasingly stark as her pregnancy progressed. One evening in her 6th month, Sarah stood in the supermarket calculating costs on her phone. Prenatal vitamins, $23. Organic apples, $4 per pound. The new O'Reilly book on machine learning algorithms that could help her prototype, $55. She put back the apples, selected conventional ones instead, and left the book on the shelf. Her unborn child's nutrition came first. Her education would have to wait. At the coffee shop, concealing her pregnancy became impossible. The uniform apron no longer tied properly around her expanding middle. Sarah resorted to safety pins to keep it closed, carefully positioning them each morning where they wouldn't be visible to customers or her manager. The deception lasted until a particularly busy morning when a pin popped open as she stretched to reach the high shelf of cups. The apron parted, revealing her 7-month belly. Her manager's eyes widened, then narrowed. "My office." Now. 10 minutes later, Sarah was unemployed again. "You should have told me," he said, not meeting her eyes as he handed her final paycheck. "We can't have someone in your condition serving customers. It makes people uncomfortable." That night, Sarah cried for the first time since leaving Chicago, silent tears soaking her pillow while Eleanor slept in the next room. She wouldn't burden her friend with more worry. The next day brought another blow. At the overcrowded public clinic where she'd waited 3 hours for a 5-minute appointment, the doctor frowned at her blood pressure reading. "It's too high," he said, scribbling notes. "You're showing signs of preeclampsia. You need bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, or you risk premature labor." Sarah almost laughed. "Bed rest? Doctor, I work nights. If I don't work, I don't eat." The doctor looked up, really seeing her for the first time. "No family support?" "Just me," Sarah replied. Later that night, sitting on the edge of her borrowed bed, Sarah stared at the envelope from James that she'd kept sealed all these months. $100,000, enough to rest properly until the baby came, enough for a proper start afterward. Her fingers traced the expensive paper. Inside was the solution to her immediate problems and the price of her self-respect. "I won't use his money," she whispered to her active baby, feeling a determined kick in response. "But I will use what I know." With sudden clarity, Sarah reached for her phone. Not for James, never for him, but for the one person who had believed in her academic potential from the beginning. "Dr. Reynolds, it's Sarah Miller from Northwestern." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I didn't know who else to turn to." For the next hour, Sarah revealed everything: the relationship with James, the pregnancy, the abandonment, her struggle to find work, and her deteriorating health. "Come to Boston," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Stay with me until the baby is born. I have contacts at MIT who could use someone with your talent in artificial intelligence, even for remote work." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her small Chicago apartment one last time. Everything she owned now fit into 2 suitcases, clothes in one, programming books, and her laptop in the other. On the kitchen counter lay James's envelope, finally opened. Inside, she'd left the check and a single note: "We don't need your money. One day you'll see what you threw away." At the bus station, Sarah watched Chicago's skyline recede through the window, one hand resting on her belly. The city had given her both the greatest pain and the most powerful motivation of her life. "This isn't a defeat," she whispered to her unborn child as the bus crossed the state line. "It's a new beginning." While the bus traveled across states toward Boston, Sarah couldn't predict that this desperate journey would be the first step in building a technological empire that would one day make James Blackwood seem small by comparison. The Greyhound bus pulled into Boston's South Station under a relentless January drizzle. Sarah stepped off carefully, one hand supporting her 8-month pregnant belly, the other clutching her heaviest suitcase. The cold air hit her face like a slap, so different from Chicago's dry winter chill. She scanned the waiting area, momentarily uncertain, until she spotted a familiar figure, silver-haired and straight-backed despite her 60 years. "Sarah!" Dr. Eleanor Reynolds waved, her face lighting up with warmth that contrasted sharply with the gray afternoon. The reunion was brief but heartfelt, neither woman inclined toward excessive displays of emotion. In Eleanor's sensible sedan, Sarah watched unfamiliar streets slide past, occasionally catching glimpses of Boston's distinctive architecture through the rain-streaked windows. "It's not much," Eleanor apologized as she unlocked the door to her Somerville apartment. "But it's home." The space was modest but inviting, bookshelves lining every available wall, papers stacked neatly on a small dining table, and a bay window overlooking a quiet street. Nothing like James's sterile luxury penthouse with its designer furniture that seemed to discourage actual sitting. "I've cleared out my office," Eleanor continued, showing Sarah a small room with a hastily assembled bed. "We'll make it properly cozy tomorrow." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Sarah placed both hands on her swollen abdomen, feeling the rhythmic movements of her child. "We made it to Boston," she whispered. "Now we start again." The following weeks established a quiet routine. Eleanor left early for her classes at MIT, while Sarah transformed the small desk in her room into a workstation. Between prenatal appointments and rest periods prescribed by her new doctor, she immersed herself in research on medical diagnostic algorithms. "What exactly are you working on?" Eleanor asked one evening, watching Sarah sketch flowcharts while balancing a bowl of soup on her belly. "An idea I had in Chicago," Sarah explained, showing Eleanor her notebook filled with diagrams. "If we could teach computers to recognize patterns that doctors take years to identify?" Eleanor studied the notes with growing interest. "This is remarkably similar to some research happening at the Media Lab right now." "I know," Sarah smiled. "I've been auditing their online lectures, but I think my approach has advantages, especially for rare condition identification." 3 afternoons a week, Sarah accompanied Eleanor to MIT, sitting in on advanced computer science lectures as a silent observer, her pregnant belly drawing curious glances from students. In the evenings, she pored over medical journals, building a database of symptom patterns for her algorithm. Each night before sleeping, Sarah would open her laptop one last time, checking for job postings and apartment listings. Her due date approached rapidly, and though Eleanor had been extraordinarily generous, Sarah knew she needed her own space, a home for her child. The labor began during the worst snowstorm Boston had seen in decades. 3 o'clock in the morning, Sarah awoke to a sharp pain and wet sheets. "Eleanor!" she called, panic rising as another contraction hit. The older woman appeared in the doorway, immediately assessing the situation. "How far apart?" "About 7 minutes," Sarah gasped. "But my water broke." The drive to Massachusetts General Hospital was treacherous, Eleanor gripping the wheel with white knuckles as they navigated nearly empty streets covered in fresh snow. Between contractions, Sarah gazed at the swirling white outside her window, thinking how different this was from the carefully planned private hospital birth James would have insisted upon. 14 hours later, Sarah held her son for the first time. Tiny fingers, dark hair, and eyes, when briefly open, a startling, familiar blue. "Noah," she whispered, the name she'd chosen months ago finally belonging to this real, breathing person. "Look at those eyes," she added softly. "Just like his. But you'll be a better man." Eleanor, who had stayed through the entire labor, smiled tiredly from the visitor's chair. "He's perfect, Sarah." Over the following weeks, Sarah established a new routine governed entirely by Noah's needs. The small room now accommodated a second-hand bassinet beside her desk. While Noah slept, Sarah worked feverishly on her algorithm, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminating the quiet night hours. "This is insane," Eleanor commented one evening, finding Sarah typing one-handed while nursing Noah. "You need to rest." "I'll rest when Noah goes to Harvard," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "Besides, working keeps me sane." The truth was more complicated. Each line of code felt like a step away from dependence, a brick in the foundation she was determined to build. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah would remember James's cruel dismissal. "You're brilliant with code, but completely unprepared for the world where I live." Those words fueled her when nothing else could. By Noah's 3rd month, Sarah had developed a promising prototype. Eleanor, initially skeptical, grew increasingly impressed with Sarah's progress. "This could actually work," she admitted, reviewing the early results. Your pattern recognition matrices are more sophisticated than similar systems I've seen demonstrated. It still misses too many edge cases, Sarah sighed, bouncing a fussy Noah on her hip. But the learning curve is improving with each dataset I add. When Noah turned 6 months old, Eleanor made an unexpected suggestion. The Morgenstein Foundation is hosting an angel investor event next week. Small startups, early-stage ideas. You should present. Sarah's initial reaction was panic. I'm nowhere near ready for investment pitches. You're more ready than half the MIT postgrads who will be there, Eleanor countered. And Charles Morgenstein is particularly interested in medical applications. Just consider it. The night before the presentation, Sarah rehearsed her pitch for the 12th time while pacing Eleanor's living room, Noah watching from his bouncy chair. "What if I bring him?" she suddenly asked. "To the presentation?" Eleanor looked surprised. "Noah? Is that wise?" "He's part of this story," Sarah said, looking at her son. "Without him, there would be no algorithm." The Morgenstein Foundation's offices occupied a renovated brownstone in Back Bay. Sarah arrived early, professionally dressed in borrowed clothes, Noah securely strapped to her chest in a carrier, mercifully asleep after his morning feeding. Among the polished MIT graduates and seasoned entrepreneurs, Sarah stood out, the only presenter with a baby. She noticed the skeptical glances, the raised eyebrows, the quiet whispers. 7 months ago, such scrutiny would have devastated her. Now it merely strengthened her resolve. When her turn came, Sarah stepped forward, her prototype loaded on her laptop. Noah stirred but remained peaceful against her chest. "My name is Sarah Reynolds, and this is my son Noah," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. 6 months ago, I was a homeless, unemployed, single mother with nothing but a laptop and an idea. Today, I'm presenting an algorithm that could revolutionize early disease detection. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah explained her system, demonstrating how it identified patterns human doctors might miss. As she spoke, her confidence grew, her expertise evident in every technical explanation. "My son taught me that I can't control the future, but I can predict possibilities based on past data," she concluded. "That's exactly what my algorithm does with medical diagnoses." After the presentations ended, Sarah was surprised when Charles Morgenstein himself approached her. "Ms. Reynolds, your presentation was fascinating," the silver-haired investor said. "Most people in your situation would have given up. You built something revolutionary instead." 2 weeks later, Sarah signed papers accepting $150,000 in seed funding. The agreement included a small apartment above Morgenstein's garage in Brookline and a consulting role for his other technology investments. The same day, Sarah visited the courthouse, Noah sleeping peacefully in his stroller. With steady hands, she completed the paperwork to legally change both their surnames from Miller to Reynolds. "Sarah Miller died in Chicago," she told Eleanor that evening. "Sarah and Noah Reynolds have a future to build." While signing Sarah Reynolds for the first time, she had no idea she was beginning a journey that would culminate 15 years later in a public confrontation that would bring James Blackwood to his knees before the woman and son he had rejected. The name change marked a new beginning, but Sarah Reynolds quickly discovered that reinventing oneself was far easier on paper than in reality. As Noah's first birthday approached, the seed money from Charles Morgenstein had helped establish the bare bones of what Sarah tentatively called Revolution Tech, a name that felt aspirational rather than descriptive of her one-woman operation running from the apartment above his garage. "Congratulations on your first year as a proper company," Eleanor said over a simple cake decorated with a single candle. Noah, more interested in smashing frosting than celebrating business milestones, giggled in his high chair. "A proper company with exactly 1 employee, no office, and a prototype that still crashes every 3rd test run," Sarah replied. But she was smiling. Even with the challenges, this modest celebration was worlds away from where she'd been a year earlier. The apartment above Morgenstein's garage had become home. small but clean, with large windows that flooded the main room with light. Sarah had converted half the living space into a workstation, her desk positioned so she could simultaneously code and keep an eye on Noah playing in his gated area. 3 months after Noah's first birthday, Sarah interviewed her first potential employee, a recent MIT graduate named Lily Chen, who specialized in medical data systems. "I can't promise stability," Sarah said candidly as they sat at her kitchen table, Noah napping in the next room. "The funding is limited, the hours will be unpredictable, and there's a very real possibility this all collapses within a year." Lily's expression remained unruffled. "Dr. Reynolds showed me your diagnostic prototype. If it works at scale the way it worked in your demo, you're not building just another health tech startup. You're creating the future of medical diagnostics." 2 days later, Revolution Tech doubled in size. Sarah rented a small space in a shared office building downtown. Just 2 desks in a corner, but it was a start. The reality of being both a founder and a single mother quickly proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. Each morning became a carefully choreographed chaos, preparing Noah's breakfast while answering urgent emails, dropping him at a neighborhood daycare that stretched her budget to breaking point, then racing to meet potential partners or investors. "Just 1 more hour of code, I promise," became Sarah's nightly mantra as she worked at her kitchen table after putting Noah to bed, the soft glow of her laptop illuminating her exhausted face. Often she would wake hours later, her cheek pressed against the keyboard, a blanket mysteriously draped over her shoulders from Eleanor's late-night visits. Noah, now a curious toddler with boundless energy, frequently accompanied Sarah to their small office on weekends or when daycare arrangements fell through. She created a special area under her desk with quiet toys and books where he could play while she worked. "Mama working," Noah would announce solemnly to visitors, pointing at Sarah as if assigning her value through her productivity. 6 months after hiring Lily, Sarah managed to secure a meeting with Dr. Jonathan Park, the head of cardiology at Boston Medical Center. His reputation for skepticism toward medical technology made him an intimidating but potentially valuable test case. "Ms. Reynolds, I've seen dozens of revolutionary diagnostic systems," Dr. Park said, not bothering to hide his doubts. "They all claim to supplement physician judgment, and they all fail when faced with complex, atypical presentations." Sarah remained composed. "Which is precisely why we'd like to test our system with your most difficult cases, the ones where traditional diagnostic approaches have failed or produced inconsistent results." To her surprise, Dr. Park agreed to a limited trial, primarily, Sarah suspected, to prove her wrong. 3 weeks later, Revolution Tech's prototype was installed on a secure computer at Boston Medical Center. Sarah and Lily spent nights refining the algorithm, feeding it anonymized patient data from past cases with known outcomes. The test that changed everything came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Dr. Park had selected a patient whose symptoms had confounded 3 specialists. The patient, a 47-year-old woman, presented with fatigue, intermittent chest pain, and shortness of breath. Standard tests showed nothing conclusive. Sarah and Lily watched nervously as Dr. Park entered the symptoms into their system. The algorithm processed for 90 seconds, then produced a result that made the doctor's eyebrows rise. "Cardiac amyloidosis?" He looked at Sarah skeptically. "That's exceedingly rare." The system flagged 3 pattern markers in the symptom progression that correlate strongly with early-stage amyloidosis, Sarah explained, pointing to the highlighted data points. "It's suggesting this specific diagnostic test to confirm." Dr. Park ordered the test, clearly expecting to disprove the algorithm. 2 days later, he called Sarah himself. "The test was positive," he said without preamble. "Early-stage cardiac amyloidosis, just as your system suggested. In 20 years of practice, I've only seen 3 cases and never caught one this early." That single success led to a small contract with Boston Medical Center to test the system on more cases. The modest payment of $30,000 felt like a fortune to Sarah. That evening, Revolution Tech celebrated with pizza delivered to their tiny office. Noah toasted with apple juice, mimicking the adults raising their paper cups of cheap wine. "To the first of many breakthroughs," Lily said. With the hospital contract providing validation, Sarah finally felt justified in hiring a third team member, a back-end developer named Marcus who could help scale the system for broader testing. The first real paycheck Sarah issued to herself went entirely to securing a proper apartment for her and Noah, a small two-bedroom unit in a modest building but with no garage below and no benefactor above. Just their own space, earned through her work. "This is our home, Noah," Sarah said as they stood in the empty living room on moving day, her voice thick with emotion. "Just ours." That night, after arranging Noah's bedroom with his favorite stuffed animals and books, Sarah sat at her new kitchen table. The first check from Boston Medical Center was framed on the wall, not for the amount, which was still modest, but for what it represented: validation. As she calculated their budget for the coming months, planning how to stretch their limited funds until the next contract, Noah padded into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas. "Mama, where my daddy?" he asked with the innocent directness of a 3-year-old climbing onto her lap. Sarah froze, unprepared for the question, though she should have anticipated it. She carefully set down her pen. "Some people aren't ready to be parents, sweetie," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But you and me, we're a complete family just as we are." Noah seemed to consider this, his blue eyes so hauntingly like James's, studying her face. "Like Tim at daycare, he has no daddy too." "That's right," Sarah said, relieved at his simple acceptance. "Okay," Noah declared, apparently satisfied. He hugged her tightly before returning to bed. Sarah remained at the table, her budget calculations forgotten. She opened her laptop and pulled up the latest version of their diagnostic algorithm, making small improvements until dawn broke over Boston. Each line of code felt like another brick in the wall between her past and her future, between Sarah Miller, the abandoned girlfriend, and Sarah Reynolds, the founder who would remake medical diagnostics. That night, while Noah slept in his own bedroom for the first time, Sarah didn't imagine that in just a few years the name Revolution Tech would be mentioned in the same corporate meetings where James Blackwood struggled to keep his company relevant in a rapidly evolving market. 4 years later, the cramped two-bedroom apartment that had once felt like a palace to Sarah and Noah had been replaced by a modest but comfortable townhouse in Cambridge. The framed check from Boston Medical Center still hung on her wall, now joined by dozens of awards, certifications, and newspaper clippings chronicling Revolution Tech's unexpected rise in the medical diagnostics field. Sarah gazed at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the confident woman who stared back. At 29, she had the polished appearance of someone a decade older, her once casual wardrobe replaced with tailored blazers and silk blouses that projected the authority her position demanded. Revolution Tech had grown from 3 people in a shared office space to 23 employees occupying an entire floor in a renovated textile factory in Kendall Square. "Mom, have you seen my notebook? The one with the red cover?" Noah's voice echoed from downstairs. Sarah smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear before heading down to help her 7-year-old son. Noah Reynolds had inherited his mother's analytical mind along with his father's striking blue eyes. Already showing remarkable aptitude for mathematics and computers, he spent hours creating rudimentary programs on the laptop Sarah had given him for his 7th birthday. "Check your backpack, sweetheart. You put it there last night, remember?" Noah's face brightened as he unzipped his backpack. "Found it. I need to show Ms. Abernathy my new algorithm. It can predict prime numbers way faster than the one she showed us." Sarah watched her son with a mixture of pride and wonder. How had this brilliant, kind-hearted boy emerged from such painful beginnings? Each milestone, his first word, first step, first line of code, felt like a personal victory against James's dismissal. "Ready for school?" Eleanor will be here any minute. Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, now retired from MIT but serving as Revolution Tech's educational advisor, had maintained her role as Noah's honorary grandmother. 3 days a week, she drove Noah to his gifted program at a private school Sarah could now comfortably afford. The doorbell rang just as Noah finished packing his lunch. "That's Grandma Elle," he announced, racing to the door. After they left, Sarah drove to the Revolution Tech offices, mentally preparing for the day's meetings. The company had established itself as a respected niche player in medical diagnostic software, with their system installed in 17 hospitals across the Northeast. The growth had been steady but controlled, exactly as Sarah had planned. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds," her assistant greeted as Sarah stepped off the elevator. "The development team is waiting in the conference room for the 8:30, and Dr. Chen asked if you could review the new cardiology module before the demo tomorrow." Sarah nodded, scanning through messages on her tablet as she walked. "Any word from Mount Sinai about the trial results?" "Not yet, but—" The assistant's phone rang, interrupting her response. "Ms. Reynolds, it's Washington University Hospital. They say it's urgent." Sarah's stomach tightened. Their system had been installed at Washington University Hospital in D.C. just 3 weeks earlier. Too soon for problems unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Sarah Reynolds speaking," she answered, bracing for bad news. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Dr. Harrison from Neurology. We need your immediate assistance with a case." The doctor's voice was tense but not accusatory. "Senator Wilcox's daughter was admitted yesterday with suspected epilepsy, but your system is flagging something entirely different. I need to know if this is a system error." Sarah ducked into her office, signaling her assistant to reschedule the morning meeting. "What exactly is the system suggesting, Dr. Harrison?" "Rasmussen's encephalitis. It's extremely rare, especially with this presentation. 5 specialists have examined her and all agree it's atypical epilepsy." Sarah pulled up the secure hospital connection on her computer. "Can you authorize emergency access to the case data? I need to see what triggered the flag." For the next 3 hours, Sarah and her lead neurological programmer analyzed the patterns the system had identified. By afternoon, they were confident enough to request a video conference with the medical team and Senator Wilcox himself. "Our algorithm identifies 3 key pattern indicators consistent with early-stage Rasmussen's, not standard epilepsy," Sarah explained, highlighting the relevant data points on the shared screen. "The temporal progression of symptoms, combined with these subtle MRI markers that traditional analysis might miss, strongly suggests you should test specifically for this condition." The skepticism on the specialists' faces was evident, but the desperate hope in the senator's eyes made it clear he would pursue any possibility. 2 days later, at 3 in the morning, Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison. "You were right," he said without preamble. "The specialized tests confirmed Rasmussen's encephalitis. We've already adjusted her treatment protocol. If we'd continued treating for epilepsy—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implications clear. Sarah sat in the darkness of her bedroom, the magnitude of what had happened slowly sinking in. Their system had potentially saved a child's life. Not just any child, but the daughter of one of the most influential senators in Washington. By morning, the story had broken. Senator Wilcox held an emotional press conference, publicly crediting the revolutionary technology from Revolution Tech with his daughter's correct diagnosis after multiple specialists had missed it. Sarah watched the press conference on the office television, surrounded by her stunned team. The phones began ringing non-stop. Investors, hospitals, journalists wanting interviews with the genius behind the algorithm. "Dr. Chen," Sarah turned to her first employee, now chief medical officer, "we're going to need to prepare for scale much faster than we planned." Within weeks, Revolution Tech's valuation had skyrocketed. Venture capitalists who had previously ignored Sarah's emails now arranged meetings through expensive intermediaries, eager to participate in the next funding round. The conference room that had once seemed unnecessarily large now barely contained the group of investors gathered for Sarah's presentation. Unlike previous fundraising attempts where she'd been made to justify every assumption and defend her credentials, today the atmosphere was reverential. Based on our current contracts and projected expansion, we're seeking $45 million in Series B funding, Sarah concluded, her voice steady despite the staggering figure, a number that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. We'd like to discuss increasing that to $60 million, the lead investor replied, to accelerate your hospital implementation timeline. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her office, the signed term sheet for $45 million lying on her desk. Outside her window, the Boston skyline glittered in the dusk. She thought of James's penthouse in Chicago, how he'd looked out at a similar skyline and casually told her she was completely unprepared for his world. The following weekend, Sarah and Noah toured a spacious house in Brookline, a beautiful colonial with a backyard large enough for the treehouse Noah had been dreaming about. "Is this really going to be our house?" Noah asked, running from room to room with uncontained excitement. "Yes, sweetheart. We can move in next month," Sarah replied, watching him claim a sunny bedroom as his own. That night, after interviewing the third potential nanny, a kind-eyed graduate student who understood the demands of Sarah's schedule, Sarah opened a bottle of champagne and stood on her new back porch, raising a solitary toast to how far they'd come. "To us," she whispered to the night air. That night, as she savored her hard-won achievement, Sarah had no idea that across the country, James Blackwood was watching the same news report about the revolutionary medical startup and casually commenting to his assistant that they should investigate acquiring this revolution tech, without any inkling of who was behind it. That night, as Sarah savored her hard-won achievement, the distant ringing of her phone pulled her from her reverie. Setting down her champagne flute, she glanced at the caller ID. Eleanor. She answered with a warm smile in her voice. "Just toasting our new home. Can you believe how far we've come?" 3 years later, that question seemed almost quaint. Sarah strode through the gleaming headquarters of Revolution Tech, now occupying an entire renovated brick building in Cambridge's tech corridor. The lobby featured a dramatic demonstration of their flagship Nova Health system, a sleek, interactive display showing how their diagnostic algorithms processed complex medical data in real time. At 32, Sarah Reynolds had fully transformed into the CEO she had once only pretended to be. Her wardrobe of carefully selected designer pieces projected quiet authority, her posture emanated confidence earned through countless boardroom battles, and the natural highlights in her hair caught the morning light as she nodded to employees who still arrived earlier than her 6 a.m. standard. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds," her executive assistant called, falling into step beside her. "The quarterly projections are on your desk, and the development team has the new pediatric module ready for your review before the Children's Hospital presentation." Sarah nodded, scanning her tablet. "Any updates on the European regulatory approval?" "Final clearance came through this morning. We're officially approved for implementation in EU hospitals." Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. From 17 hospitals 3 years ago to 230 today, with offices in Boston, San Francisco, and now London. The team that had once fit around a single pizza now occupied 3 floors of dedicated talent: engineers, medical specialists, implementation experts, and a growing sales force. Later that morning, Sarah sat at the head of the conference table, listening to her chief financial officer detail their record-breaking quarter. "With the European approval secured, we're projecting revenue growth of 32% year-over-year," he concluded. "The board will be pleased." Sarah nodded, but her attention had already shifted to the next item on her agenda: Noah's mathematics competition that afternoon. At 10 years old, her son had blossomed into a genuine prodigy, combining his mother's analytical persistence with an intuitive understanding of complex systems that sometimes left even Sarah amazed. She slipped into the auditorium just as Noah's name was called. Sliding into a seat near the back, Sarah watched her son approach the whiteboard with calm confidence. The problem, a complex calculus equation that would challenge most college students, seemed to pose no difficulty as Noah's hand moved across the board, his solution elegant and efficient. When he was announced as the state champion, Sarah's applause was the loudest in the room. Noah's eyes found hers immediately, his smile bright with shared triumph. That evening, celebrating over ice cream, Noah asked the question that had been increasingly on his mind. "Mom, do you think my dad was good at math too?" Sarah hesitated, carefully selecting her words as she always did when Noah inquired about his father. He was certainly analytical, good with patterns and projections. Noah nodded thoughtfully, accepting this small piece of information to add to the vague picture he had constructed of his absent father. The following week brought an unexpected development. In her downtown office, Sarah sat across from Gerald Harrington, head of mergers and acquisitions for Meridian Health Group, a European conglomerate that had been courting Revolution Tech for months. $650 million, Harrington stated, sliding the formal offer across her desk. Full acquisition with guaranteed autonomy for your development team for at least 3 years. Sarah maintained her composure, though the figure, representing wealth beyond anything she had imagined when starting the company in her tiny apartment, caused her heart to race slightly. "We'll need to conduct thorough due diligence, of course," she replied evenly. "My team will require complete transparency regarding Meridian's partnerships and subsidiaries." 3 days later, Sarah sat in the offices of Revolution Tech's legal counsel, reviewing the complex ownership structures of Meridian Health Group. Her eye caught on a name buried in an appendix, a strategic partnership agreement with Blackwood Medical Technologies for distribution rights in North America. Sarah stared at the name, a cold wave washing over her. James Blackwood. After all these years, his shadow had found its way back into her life through this seemingly perfect acquisition offer. The memory of his cruel dismissal echoed in her mind. "You're brilliant with code, but completely unprepared for the world where I live." The words that had once shattered her now fueled a fierce resolve. That afternoon, Sarah called an emergency video conference with Meridian's executives. "After careful consideration, Revolution Tech must decline your acquisition offer," she stated, her voice steady despite the tension visible on the executives' faces. "Ms. Reynolds, perhaps you misunderstood the terms. $650 million. "The terms are perfectly clear," Sarah interrupted. "However, Revolution Tech cannot align with your current partnership structure. We find it incompatible with our corporate values." The rejection sent shockwaves through the industry. Business publications scrambled to understand why Revolution Tech had walked away from what would have been one of the largest health tech acquisitions of the year. "I know it seems insane," Sarah explained to her stunned executive team afterward, "but I'm asking you to trust my long-term vision. Revolution Tech is worth more, much more, than they offered." Later that evening, Eleanor confronted Sarah in her office after everyone else had left. "It's because of him, isn't it?" the older woman asked gently. "After all these years?" "This is a purely strategic decision," Sarah insisted, though her eyes betrayed her. "We can build something much larger independently." Eleanor's knowing look spoke volumes. "Just be careful not to let old wounds dictate new opportunities." That night, Noah found Sarah at the kitchen table, surrounded by financial projections and market analyses. "Mom, everyone at school is talking about how you turned down enough money to buy an island," he said, sliding onto a chair beside her. "Why didn't you sell?" Sarah set down her papers, giving her son her full attention. "Because some things are more important than money, Noah. Integrity is one of them." The following morning, the Wall Street Journal ran a feature titled, "The Enigmatic Billionaire Who Said No, Who is Sarah Reynolds?" The article speculated wildly about the mysterious CEO who had built Revolution Tech from nothing and now seemed indifferent to enormous wealth. In her office, Sarah met with the company's legal counsel, drafting a new clause for all future business agreements. "This may seem unusual," she explained, "but I need specific language prohibiting any business transactions, partnerships, or negotiations with Blackwood Industries, Blackwood Medical Technologies, or any entity substantially owned or controlled by James Blackwood or the Blackwood family." The lawyer raised an eyebrow but made the requested changes. "This is fairly specific. Some might interpret it as personal rather than strategic." "It's protection," Sarah replied firmly. "Nothing more." As the lawyer left, Sarah's assistant entered with the latest industry reports. "You might find this interesting," she said, placing a document on Sarah's desk. "Blackwood Medical is losing significant market share to newer technologies, like ours." Later, alone in her office, Sarah opened the Blackwood Medical Annual Report. James Blackwood's corporate photograph stared back at her, older now, with touches of gray at his temples, but still possessing that same confident smile that had once charmed her. "You never will own what I've built," she whispered, closing the report and turning instead to the architectural plans for Revolution Tech's new research facility. While signing the new corporate clause, Sarah couldn't imagine that she was just 3 years away from receiving the first direct acquisition offer from Blackwood Medical Technologies itself, initiating a cat-and-mouse game that would culminate in the most unlikely of reunions. While signing the new corporate clause, Sarah felt a strange sense of finality. 3 years later, that sentiment seemed almost prophetic as she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office, watching Boston's skyline shimmer in the early morning light. At 34, Sarah Reynolds had transformed Revolution Tech from a promising startup into a technology powerhouse valued at over $2 billion. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had meticulously crafted her image, tailored Armani suit, understated but elegant jewelry, and a confidence that radiated from within. Nothing remained of the desperate, pregnant woman James Blackwood had dismissed as unprepared for his world. "Ms. Reynolds," her executive assistant's voice came through the intercom, "Blackwood Medical Technologies representatives are on line 1. Sarah's spine stiffened. After years of maneuvering to avoid any business connection with James Blackwood's company, they were now reaching out directly. She pressed the button. "Put them through." "Ms. Reynolds," a polished male voice began, "this is Victor Castillo, Chief Strategy Officer at Blackwood Medical Technologies. I'm calling on behalf of our CEO, James Blackwood." Sarah's fingers tightened around her pen. "What can I do for Blackwood Medical, Mr. Castillo?" "Mr. Blackwood would like to discuss a potential acquisition. We're prepared to offer $2.1 billion for Revolution Tech. Full valuation, immediate liquidity for all shareholders." The figure, astronomical by any standard, hung in the air between them. Sarah allowed 3 seconds of silence before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Castillo, but I can assure you there is no price that would make me sell Revolution Tech to Blackwood Medical." The stunned silence on the other end gave Sarah a moment of quiet satisfaction. "Perhaps we should arrange a meeting with Mr. Blackwood personally to discuss—" "That won't be necessary," Sarah interrupted. "My position is firm. Revolution Tech is not for sale to Blackwood Medical under any circumstances." An hour later, Sarah faced her bewildered board of directors in the company's sleek conference room. "I understand this seems irrational," she acknowledged, meeting their confused expressions. "But I'm asking you to trust my judgment on this. Our technology is worth more, to patients and eventually to shareholders, if we remain independent." That evening, Sarah arrived home to find Noah at the kitchen table, surrounded by biology textbooks and his laptop. At 12, he'd grown tall for his age, his dark hair perpetually falling into eyes that remained startlingly blue, a constant reminder of his paternity. "Mom," he called without looking up, "did you know that eye color inheritance doesn't follow simple Mendelian patterns? It's polygenic." Sarah set down her briefcase, instantly alert. "What prompted this research?" Noah shrugged, finally looking up. Biology class. We're studying heredity. It just got me wondering why I have blue eyes when yours are brown. Basic genetics says that's unlikely. Sarah sat beside him, heart racing. This moment had been inevitable, but she'd hoped for more time. Your father had blue eyes, she said carefully. Very blue. Like yours. Noah nodded, absorbing this rare piece of information about his mysterious father. Was he good at science too? He had a strong mind for business. His family's company works in medical technology. Noah's eyes widened slightly. Medical technology? Like us? Different applications, Sarah said quickly. Much more traditional. For the next week, Noah peppered her with increasingly specific questions about his father. Each answer Sarah provided was truthful, but incomplete, protecting her son from the cruelty of his beginning. In her office, Sarah reviewed the latest implementation statistics. Nova Health was now being used in 422 hospitals worldwide, with diagnosis accuracy rates that consistently outperformed all competitors, including Blackwood Medical's flagship system. The phone on her desk rang. Ms. Reynolds, Dr. Harriman from Mount Sinai is on the line. They're switching from Blackwood's diagnostic system to Nova Health after their 3-month comparative trial. Sarah couldn't help but smile. Put him through. Later that week in Manhattan, James Blackwood slammed his fist on his mahogany desk, startling his executive team. How are we losing Mount Sinai? They've been with us for 8 years. He glared at the quarterly report showing accelerating market share losses to Revolution Tech. Their trial showed Nova Health reducing misdiagnosis rates by 38% compared to our system, his CTO explained uncomfortably. They're not the only ones switching. We've lost 14 major hospital contracts this quarter alone. James ran his hand through his hair, now distinguished with gray at the temples. What do we know about this Sarah Reynolds? Where did she come from? How did she build this technology that's eating our lunch? His assistant shifted nervously. That's the strange thing, sir. We can't find much about her before Boston. She has a computer science background, but it's like she emerged fully formed about 12 years ago. And she's refused every acquisition offer, not just ours. James narrowed his eyes. Everyone has a price. Increase our offer to $3 billion and arrange a meeting. I'll handle this personally. 3 days later, Sarah sat in her home office reviewing invitation emails when one subject line caught her attention. Formal invitation, Medical Innovation Awards Gala, New York. Opening it, she scanned the details. The prestigious annual event at the Metropolitan Museum of Art recognized breakthrough innovations in medicine. Revolution Tech's Nova Health system had been selected for the top honor, with Sarah named Innovator of the Year. As she read further, her breath caught. Among the listed sponsors, Blackwood Medical Technologies. Sarah was still contemplating the invitation when Noah knocked on her office door, his expression excited. Mom, did you see the email about the Innovation Gala in New York? Dr. Levinson from MIT will be there. He's the one running the neural computing lab I told you about. Sarah looked up at her son, momentarily startled by how grown up he looked. You've heard about the gala already? Noah rolled his eyes good-naturedly. They announced the winners on the science news sites an hour ago. You're all over the internet. Revolutionary AI diagnostics creator takes top honor. Can I come with you? Dr. Levinson said he wants to discuss my research project. Sarah considered the implications. The gala would mean potentially facing James Blackwood after 15 years, but it would also be a crucial networking opportunity for Noah's future. Of course you can come, she said finally. It's an important night for the company. The next morning, Sarah's face appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, "The Silent Revolution of Sarah Reynolds." The article detailed her journey from single mother to billionaire tech CEO, praising her leadership style and innovative approach to medical diagnostics. What the article didn't mention, because Sarah had never revealed it, was her connection to the Blackwood family or the fact that she had rejected their acquisition offers multiple times. When the magazine reached Blackwood Medical's headquarters, James Blackwood studied Sarah's cover photo with intense curiosity. "So this is the woman who keeps outmaneuvering us," he murmured, examining the poised, confident executive with no recognition whatsoever of the young programmer he had once discarded. 2 weeks before the gala, Sarah finally sat Noah down for a carefully edited version of the truth. "Noah, there's something about your father I need to tell you before our trip to New York." Noah's expression grew serious. "Is he going to be there?" Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because Noah continued, "Whenever anyone mentions Blackwood, you get this look, and they're sponsoring the gala. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots." Sarah shook her head slightly, amazed at her son's perception. "You've always been too observant for your own good. Yes, your father is James Blackwood. We were together briefly in Chicago before I moved to Boston. He chose not to be part of our lives." Noah absorbed this without visible emotion. "Will you be okay seeing him?" Sarah reached for her son's hand, moved by his concern for her rather than himself. "I'll be fine. We've both built amazing lives without him." As they prepared for the trip to New York, Sarah wasn't aware that James Blackwood had become obsessed with finally meeting the elusive CEO who had rejected his every overture. In his Manhattan office, he rehearsed approaches with his assistant. "Increase our offer to $3 billion, he instructed. "Everyone has a price." While making final preparations for the gala, Sarah couldn't imagine that the confrontation with James would be even more dramatic than she anticipated, nor that the public recognition that would follow would forever change not just her life, but the entire landscape of medical technology. While making final preparations for the gala, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. The new Forbes issue had just been released digitally, and her communications director had flagged it as urgent. Sarah opened the link and found herself staring at her own image on the digital cover, alongside the headline, "The Silent Revolution of Sarah Reynolds." She sat down slowly at her desk, suddenly aware of how public her story had become. The article portrayed her journey from struggling single mother to technology pioneer with reverent tones, describing her leadership style as revolutionary in its empathy, and her technological innovations as fundamentally changing the practice of medicine. What the writer couldn't know, what Sarah had carefully concealed from everyone outside her innermost circle, was the cruel abandonment that had set her path in motion. "Mom, have you seen this?" Noah called from the living room. At nearly 15, his voice occasionally cracked, a reminder of how quickly he was growing up. "They're calling you the most influential woman in medical technology of the decade." Sarah joined her son on the sofa, reading over his shoulder as he scrolled through the article on his tablet. The journalist had detailed Revolution Tech's meteoric rise, the unprecedented accuracy of the Nova Health system, and Sarah's unconventional path to success. There was even a sidebar about Noah, mentioning his early acceptance to MIT's special program and his own budding innovations in neural computing. "They make us sound like superheroes," Noah laughed, but his eyes shone with undisguised pride. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "Just wait until they see what you create at MIT." Across Manhattan, in the executive suite of Blackwood Medical Technologies, James Blackwood flipped through the physical copy of Forbes that his assistant had placed on his desk. "So this is the woman who keeps rejecting our offers," he mused, studying Sarah's composed expression on the cover. No hint of recognition crossed his face, just the calculating assessment of a competitor. "Find me everything about her background. There must be something we can leverage." His assistant shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we've tried. Her history before Boston is remarkably thin. She emerged there as a single mother with a prototype diagnostic algorithm and connections to MIT, but before that..." He shrugged helplessly. James frowned, tapping the magazine with his finger. "Everyone has a past. Dig deeper. I want to know what makes Sarah Reynolds tick, and what might make her finally agree to sell." The week before the gala, Sarah dedicated an evening to finalizing preparations for their trip to New York. Noah found her in her home office, organizing documents for meetings she'd scheduled around the awards ceremony. "Mom, can I ask you something important?" he said, leaning against the doorframe in a posture so reminiscent of James that Sarah felt a momentary disorientation. "Of course, sweetheart." Noah took a deep breath. "Is my father going to be at the gala?" Sarah's hands froze over her keyboard. She had been preparing for this conversation, crafting careful half-truths that would protect Noah from the full brutality of his father's rejection, but she hadn't expected the direct question. "What makes you ask that?" She managed, buying herself precious seconds. "I'm not a child anymore," Noah said quietly. "I've noticed how you react whenever Blackwood Technologies comes up, and I know they're one of the sponsors of the gala. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." Sarah gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "You've always been too perceptive for your own good," she said with a sad smile. "Yes, your father is James Blackwood. We were together in Chicago before I moved to Boston. Did he know about me?" Noah asked, his blue eyes, so like his father's, steady on her face. Sarah nodded slowly. "He did. And he didn't want me. It wasn't a question. He wasn't ready to be a father," Sarah said carefully. "Sometimes people make choices based on what's convenient for them, not what's right." Noah absorbed this with remarkable composure. "Will seeing him bother you?" Sarah reached across the desk and took her son's hand, moved by his concern for her feelings rather than his own. "I made peace with his choice a long time ago. It led us here, and I wouldn't trade our life for anything." That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Sarah opened her laptop and, against her better judgment, searched for recent images of James Blackwood. The photos showed a man in his mid-40s, still handsome but with lines of stress around his eyes and gray at his temples. His most recent divorce, his second, had made minor headlines in business publications, as had rumors of questionable business practices at Blackwood Medical. In his Manhattan penthouse, James was conducting his own research, frustrated by the lack of personal information about Sarah Reynolds. "Practically nothing before Boston," his assistant reported via video call. "She changed her name around the time she founded Revolution Tech. Before that, the trail goes cold." "Changed her name from what?" James demanded. "We don't know yet. The records are sealed." James leaned back in his chair, irritated. "Keep looking. Everyone leaves traces." 3 days before the gala, Sarah and Noah checked into their suite at the Four Seasons in Manhattan. From their windows, they could see Central Park spread out below them, a sprawling green oasis amid the steel and glass towers. "This is incredible," Noah said, pressing his hand against the glass. "Our whole apartment building could fit in this hotel." Sarah watched her son with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. In a different world, he might have grown up in luxury like this, might have taken such accommodations for granted. Instead, he had known the struggle of their early years, had done homework at her desk in their shared office space, had celebrated when they could finally afford their first modest apartment. "We've come a long way," she agreed, coming to stand beside him at the window. That evening, Sarah reviewed her acceptance speech while Noah worked on homework at the suite's dining table. She would need to be perfect at the gala, poised, articulate, and in complete control. The thought of facing James after 15 years sent occasional tremors of anxiety through her, but she refused to let it show. "Mom, do you think he'll recognize me?" Noah asked suddenly, looking up from his physics textbook. Sarah met his gaze across the room. "I don't know. You have his eyes." "What will you do if he wants to talk to me?" "That will be entirely up to you," Sarah said carefully. "You're old enough to make that decision for yourself. But remember, biology doesn't make someone a parent. Being there does." The day before the gala, a package arrived at their suite containing a custom-designed gown for Sarah, midnight blue silk that shimmered with subtle movement, elegant and understated. She tried it on while Noah was meeting with his MIT advisor in the hotel's business center. Standing before the full-length mirror, Sarah barely recognized herself. The desperate young woman James had dismissed so cruelly had disappeared completely, replaced by someone polished, successful, and entirely self-possessed. She wondered if he would see any trace of the girl he had known, or if the transformation was complete enough to render her a stranger. In his office at Blackwood headquarters, James finalized his strategy for the gala with his executive team. "I want a private meeting with Reynolds," he instructed. "Make whatever arrangements necessary. It's time to settle this face-to-face." "And if she refuses again?" his CFO asked cautiously. James smiled with cold confidence. "She won't. Not when she hears our new offer." While preparing for bed in their suite, Sarah checked her phone one last time and found a message from Eleanor. "Remember who you are now. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won." As she prepared to sleep on the eve of the gala, Sarah couldn't imagine that the confrontation with James would be even more dramatic than she anticipated, nor that the public recognition that would follow would forever change not just her life, but the entire landscape of medical technology. The night before the gala, Sarah stood at the window of her Four Seasons suite watching Manhattan's glittering skyline. 15 years ago, she had left Chicago with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Tomorrow, she would face the man who had discarded her, not as a desperate, pregnant girl, but as a billionaire being honored for revolutionizing an entire industry. The symmetry felt like poetry. The evening of the gala arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect September night that made Manhattan feel magical. Sarah studied her reflection in the suite's full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the custom sapphire blue gown that draped elegantly across her shoulders and cascaded to the floor. The delicate diamond necklace, a gift to herself when Revolution Tech reached its first billion-dollar valuation, caught the light as she turned. "How do I look?" she asked Noah, who waited on the suite's sofa, remarkably handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Like a CEO worth every penny of the billions they say you're worth," he replied with a proud smile. "Let's show New York who rules the medical innovation world." The limousine glided through Manhattan's evening traffic toward the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Sarah mentally reviewed her acceptance speech while Noah scrolled through messages on his phone, occasionally sharing comments from MIT professors excited to see him at the event. When they arrived, camera flashes greeted them at the entrance. The grand staircase of the Met had been transformed with strategic lighting, each step seeming to glow from within. Inside, the Temple of Dender housed elegantly decorated tables where the most influential names in medicine, technology, and finance engaged in animated conversation. "Ms. Reynolds, congratulations on the award," called the CEO of Mount Sinai Hospital, approaching as soon as they entered. "Our diagnostic error rates have dropped 38% since implementing Nova Health." Sarah graciously accepted his praise, then introduced Noah, watching with quiet pride as her son confidently discussed technical specifications with the hospital's chief technology officer. More admirers approached: venture capitalists, medical researchers, technology developers, all eager for a moment with the woman who had revolutionized medical diagnostics. Across the vast hall, James Blackwood stood alone, nursing a glass of champagne. At 45, he still cut an impressive figure in his tuxedo, though the past decade had added distinguished gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of stress rather than laughter. He surveyed the room with practiced nonchalance, watching the crowd part repeatedly around someone he couldn't quite see. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced from the central stage, silencing the elegant murmur of the crowd, "please welcome our honoree of the evening, the visionary founder and CEO of Revolution Tech, Sarah Reynolds." James froze, his champagne flute nearly slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. He watched in stunned disbelief as a woman in blue made her way to the stage with graceful confidence. The name had meant nothing to him until this moment. Sarah Reynolds, the competitor he couldn't buy, the innovator he couldn't beat. But those eyes, that smile, the determined set of her jaw. It couldn't be. 15 years had passed, but as she took the stage, James felt the blood drain from his face. The young programmer he had discarded like an inconvenient draft was now at the center of the world he had told her she could never understand, applauded by the same titans of industry he had once been so desperate to impress. "It is an honor to receive this recognition," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident echoing through the hall. "When I started Revolution Tech 15 years ago, I was just a single mother with a laptop and a stubborn idea." Single mother. 15 years. The dates aligned perfectly with their brief relationship in Chicago. James felt suddenly dizzy, his eyes frantically scanning the room until they found the tall teenager in a tuxedo who had entered with Sarah, a boy of approximately 14 with an unmistakable pair of Blackwood blue eyes. Sarah's speech continued, detailing her journey without ever mentioning the abandonment or specific hardships she had faced. Instead, she spoke about persistence, innovation, and Revolution Tech's commitment to democratizing access to accurate diagnoses. "Our Nova Health technology is now in 237 hospitals across 8 countries, and our new outbreak prediction system has just been adopted by the CDC," she explained with calculated modesty. "But what makes me proudest is knowing that our algorithms have already saved more than 15,000 lives that might have been lost to late or incorrect diagnoses." Applause thundered through the hall while James remained paralyzed, his mind processing the magnitude of what he was witnessing. Sarah wasn't just a business competitor, she was the woman he had dismissed with a check and cruel words. And the teenager? Could it be possible? During the cocktail reception after the ceremony, James observed from a distance as Sarah conversed with executives, doctors, and investors. Each confident laugh, each firm handshake, each passionate technical discussion felt like a knife in his past arrogance. Finally, gathering courage and fortified by 3 whiskeys, James approached when Sarah momentarily stood alone near a sculpture. "Sarah," he said, his voice betraying unusual nervousness. "Sarah Miller, or should I say Reynolds." She turned slowly, showing no surprise. Her eyes met his with a calmness that only true power provides. "James Blackwood," she replied without emotion, as if acknowledging a distant acquaintance. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." You look incredible," he stammered, uncomfortable with the power inversion. "Your company is impressive. We tried to acquire it several times, but now I understand why our offers were refused." A slight smile touched Sarah's lips. "Some things are priceless, James. Building something from scratch my way is one of them." "Sarah, about Chicago, about what happened," he began, lowering his voice. "If I had known what you would become, I never would have. If you had known I would become a billionaire, you never would have abandoned me while pregnant?" Sarah completed, her voice quiet but cutting. "That says everything about you, doesn't it?" Before James could respond, Noah approached, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Mom, Dr. Chen from Johns Hopkins wants to talk about implementing our triage system in their emergency department," said the teenager, handing a glass to Sarah before noticing James. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting anything important," Sarah assured him, touching her son's shoulder affectionately. "Noah, this is James Blackwood of Blackwood Medical Technologies. Mr. Blackwood, my son, Noah Reynolds." James's world seemed to crumble as he observed the teenager's face, a younger version of himself blended with Sarah's features. There was no doubt, he was looking at the son he had rejected before birth. Blackwood Medical Technologies? Noah's eyes lit with professional recognition but without any personal connection. "You implemented our Nova Health system last year, right? I read it reduced your diagnostic errors by 62%. Yes," James stuttered, unable to look away from the eyes that mirrored his own. It's been transformative for our operations. Cool! I'm developing a neurological extension for the system as my research project for MIT. Noah continued enthusiastically. It improves early detection of conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Sarah watched the interaction with a neutral expression, allowing James to fully absorb the reality of the brilliant young man who could have called him father. MIT? At your age? James asked, stunned. Early admission special program, Noah explained modestly. I start in the fall, but I'm already working on projects with them. A photographer approached asking to capture the Innovator of the Year with her son. As they posed, James remained there, invisible and irrelevant, observing the legacy he had rejected. When the photographer moved away, James made one last desperate attempt. Sarah, could we talk privately? There's so much I need to explain, to make up for. Sarah studied him for a moment, then responded with the calm of someone who no longer carries any burden. There's nothing to explain, James. You made your decision 15 years ago and I made mine. Looking back, I should thank you. Your rejection was the catalyst that pushed me to build something greater than I ever would have built by your side. At that moment, the host announced that the CEO of Revolution Tech would grant exclusive interviews to selected media outlets. Sarah offered James one last look. If you'll excuse me, I have an empire to run. As she walked away elegantly with Noah at her side, James remained paralyzed, finally comprehending the magnitude of everything he had lost with a single cruel decision made 15 years ago. As she walked away elegantly with Noah at her side, James remained paralyzed, finally comprehending the magnitude of everything he had lost with a single cruel decision made 15 years ago. The room continued to buzz around him, but he stood motionless, the noise fading to a distant hum as the reality of the situation crashed over him in waves. The following morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of her hotel suite. She stretched contentedly, feeling lighter somehow. The confrontation she had dreaded for years had come and gone, leaving her not devastated, but liberated. The smell of coffee drew her to the living area of the suite, where Noah sat at the dining table, laptop open, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he reviewed lines of code while simultaneously devouring a stack of pancakes. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up. "The reviews of your speech are all over the tech sites. They're calling you the future of medical diagnostics personified." Sarah smiled, pouring herself coffee. "As long as they're also talking about the technology itself, that's what matters." Noah paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Mom, who was that Blackwood guy last night? He was looking at you really strangely." Sarah took a deep breath, considering her response carefully. For 14 years, she had protected Noah from the full truth about his father, crafting a narrative about a brief college relationship with someone who chose not to be part of their lives. "An old acquaintance from Chicago," she answered, choosing a partial truth. "We knew each other before you were born." Noah looked up, his intuition detecting the undercurrents in her voice. "He seemed really shocked to see me, almost like he'd seen a ghost." Before Sarah could elaborate, her phone rang. It was her executive assistant, her voice tense with concern. "Sarah, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I think you should see the article that just broke on Business Insider. It's about you, last night's gala, and James Blackwood." Minutes later, Sarah was reading the article with her heart racing. An investigative reporter had connected the dots. Sarah's presence in Chicago 15 years ago coinciding with James's brief stint in the city. Noah's age, Revolution Tech's persistent refusal to negotiate with Blackwood, and the visibly tense encounter at the gala. The article didn't directly assert paternity, but raised enough questions to generate substantial speculation. "Noah," Sarah said, setting down her tablet, "I think we need to talk." Over the next hour, in a painful but necessary conversation, Sarah revealed the complete truth to her son. She explained how she had met James, how he had abandoned her when pregnant, and how that abandonment ultimately became the fuel for creating Revolution Tech. "So that man last night, he's my biological father?" Noah asked, absorbing the revelation with surprising maturity. "And he didn't know I was his son?" "He didn't know until last night," Sarah confirmed. "And I want you to understand something very important. You never needed him. We built our life, our company, our success without any help from him." Noah remained silent for several minutes, processing the information. "Is that why you named the main system Nova Health? Because of my name?" Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "You've always been my inspiration. Every line of code, every contract, every expansion, it was all to build something that no one could take away from us." Meanwhile, across Manhattan, James Blackwood faced both personal and professional crisis. The Business Insider article had spread rapidly, and his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from press officers, board members, and confused relatives. His ex-wife, with whom he'd had a bitter divorce 6 months earlier, had already given a scathing statement to a tabloid. "I'm not surprised James abandoned a pregnant woman. His pattern has always been to put career and convenience above relationships." At Blackwood Medical Technologies headquarters, an emergency board meeting had been convened to discuss the implications of the story. The revelation that the CEO had rejected the founder of Revolution Tech, now their main competitor, when she was pregnant with his child, was causing serious damage to the company's reputation, especially after recent marketing initiatives focused on family values and corporate ethics. "Stocks have fallen 7% since the market opened," reported the CFO, his voice tense. "Investors are concerned about potential conflicts of interest in previous attempts to acquire Revolution Tech." James barely heard him. His thoughts were fixed on the brilliant teenager he had met the previous night, a technology prodigy about to enter MIT, raised exclusively by Sarah. A son who carried his DNA, his eyes, but nothing of his flawed character. By afternoon, desperate and impulsive, James appeared at the Four Seasons, determined to speak with Sarah and Noah before they returned to Boston. The receptionist, recognizing him from the news, reluctantly called the suite after his insistence. To his surprise, it was Noah who answered the phone. "Mr. Blackwood," said the teenager with a formality that pained James. "My mother is in a video conference at the moment. Can I help you?" "Noah," James took a deep breath. "I believe we have much to discuss. About the past, about who I am to you." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Noah responded with disconcerting maturity. "I know who you are biologically. My mother told me everything this morning. But with all due respect, being a DNA donor doesn't make you my father." The response hit James like a physical blow. "I understand your anger, but—" "I'm not angry," Noah interrupted, his voice calm. "I'm just stating facts. A father is someone who's present, who teaches, who supports. My mother was all of that for me. You were an absence." "I'd like to change that," James insisted, desperation in his voice. "We could get to know each other. I could help with your education, open doors." "My doors are already open," Noah replied with the same confidence Sarah displayed. "And regarding my education, my mother has already secured everything I need. Actually, our technology is currently outperforming your companies in every industry benchmark." At that moment, Sarah took over the phone, having ended her meeting. "James, I appreciate that you want to connect with Noah, but that decision is entirely his. If he wishes to know you in the future, we won't interfere. But I won't allow you to enter our lives out of guilt or passing curiosity." "Sarah, please," James pleaded. "I made the worst mistake of my life 15 years ago. Give me a chance to make it up to you both." "No compensation is necessary," she replied with surprising serenity. "Look around you, James. I've built a more innovative company than yours, raised an extraordinary son, and have a fulfilling life. If you're seeking forgiveness, I forgave you long ago. Not for you, but for myself. It was a burden I didn't need to carry." "Then what happens now?" he asked, defeated. Now, we return to Boston, continue expanding Revolution Tech, and Noah prepares for MIT. As for you, that depends entirely on you. 2 weeks later, an official statement from Blackwood Medical Technologies announced that James Blackwood was temporarily stepping down as CEO to address personal matters. The same release revealed an unexpected $50 million donation to support programs for single-mother entrepreneurs. Sarah read the news in her Boston office, a slight smile on her lips. It wasn't revenge she felt, nor even satisfaction at James's downfall. It was something deeper, the sensation of a completed cycle. On her office wall, a framed photograph showed Sarah and Noah on stage at the gala, receiving the Innovator of the Year award. Beside it, a framed article from the front page of the Wall Street Journal bore the headline, "Revolution Tech announces global expansion, Nova Health system to be implemented in 500 new hospitals." That evening, as she dined with Noah in their Brookline home, Sarah observed her son enthusiastically explaining his latest research project. The pain of abandonment, which had once defined so much of her identity, had transformed into something infinitely more valuable. The foundation upon which she had built not just a billion-dollar company, but a life of meaning. "You know," said Noah, interrupting her thoughts, "I think we should name the next major system in honor of Aunt Eleanor. After all, she believed in us when nobody else did." Sarah smiled, touched by the suggestion. "The Eleanor system. It has a nice ring to it." While Sarah Reynolds, once abandoned and now triumphant, knew with absolute certainty that true success wasn't in the billions in her bank account or the awards on her wall. It was in the freedom she had won, the freedom to define her own worth, write her own story, and build a legacy that no abandonment could ever diminish. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.